Hebrews 13, 1 through 3 in the Christian Standard Bible say, "Let brotherly love continue. Don't neglect to show hospitality, for by doing this, some have welcomed angels as guests without knowing it. Remember the prisoners as though you were in prison with them, and the mistreated as though you yourselves were suffering bodily." In this section of Scripture, the author just finished explaining the importance of Jesus as the Christ, then went on to explain how we should receive the kingdom that Jesus brought, stating that this kingdom cannot be shaken. After this pericope, the author will go on to explain the consistency of Christ. Aaron Simmons, how do you think the command to love for one another and to care for others mentioned here factors into these other messages of Christ's consistency and his unshakable kingdom?
Wow, so we're diving in quick. I tell you what, that's fantastic. So how does the command to love relate to the unshakable kingdom of God? Is that said correctly?
Yeah.
All right. So yesterday, my son and I were out walking, and he said, "Dad, if we're all going to die eventually and on a long enough timeline, everybody's going to forget that you ever even lived. Why does it matter that we do good stuff?" And I said, well, because we do good stuff because it's good to do, because it creates a world that we want to inhabit. And I said, but that view is not all that we can say for Christians. We also can say because God is good and cares about good being what animates our life. And he's like, yeah, but how do we know what's good? And my response was, by looking to the example set in the life of Christ. And the example that I think Christ gives us is one that invites us to recognize that the face of each and every other, at least all human others, but I would even say, ecosystems, concerns for animal others, like there's a broad conception of neighbors that we are commanded to love. And this is what then challenges, as I told my son Atticus, challenges any kind of like latent sense that egoism is a better mode of living. So for me, the example of Christ is one that then invites us to inhabit what the Hebraic scriptures are offering us, right? The widow, the orphan, the stranger, a concern for the oppressed, the poor, the downtrodden, the captive. And then Jesus takes that and says, yeah. So what's it look like to do that? It looks like loving your neighbor as yourself, which then allows for appropriately understanding self-love as a mode of other orientation. So it's not that egoism is just one other ethical option like it is for philosophers like myself. It's instead put off the table as misunderstanding what Christianity involves, what it invites us to. And this is why, for me, it calls forth a radical critique of those forms of Christianity or communities that identify as Christian who seem to be okay with egoism, with a kind of self-exaltation and a dismissiveness to the neighbors that we are commanded to love.
Yeah, good stuff. Also, Atticus is such a cool name.
We were Harper Lee fans, my wife and I, so
Good stuff, though. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Whole Church Podcast, possibly one of your favorite church unity podcasts. Possibly not. That's fine, too. We're not hurt by that, probably. Anyways, today I am excited. This is the first episode of the year. We're going to be discussing one of my personal heroes, Professor J. Aaron Simmons. We're talking some about philosophy, some about his book, Camping with Kierkegaard. So this is Kierkegaard with the new year. Is the name of this episode, maybe. I don't know. I am also here. My main job is to introduce the one and only, the greatest co-host of any podcast ever, the one and only TJ, Tiberius Juan Blackwell. How's it going?
Good.
Yeah. So excited to jump into this one.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this, you might also like to check out the On His Own Ministry Podcast Network website. The link is down below. Find shows on our sister company. I don't know. We started it. Sister seems incorrect, but that's technically right.
Yeah.
So
Stepchildren.
Yeah. Stepkids. Also, check out the store. The merch is super comfy. It's pretty understated, and it's a nice conversation starter if you want to get somebody into the whole church unity movement.
Yeah. not unitology. That's
Not
something different.
unitology. That's a thing for our other show.
Oh yeah, and Aaron might not know this. Our listeners probably do, but I do like to start every show off with the greatest form of unity. So it's a really deep, awesome sacrament of silliness, where we will ask a silly question, and TJ and I will answer first to give you a little bit of time to think about it. This one's a flashback silly question that I might have changed my answer on. Not sure. I felt like it was appropriate in the new year to go back to a oldie, but a goodie, a favorite. TJ, who's your favorite animated, inanimate object?
It's a really hard question. I feel like
It always is.
last time I said the toaster from the Brave Little Toaster.
I think you did. A lot of people say carpet from Aladdin. That's a good one too.
Carpet's a good one. Carpet's a really good answer. I'm gonna go with Lumiere this time. Lumiere from Beauty and the Beast.
That's an awesome one.
Yeah, he's just got the style. He's got the flair.
I'm gonna cheat. This is probably a recency bias. I really enjoy the water that comes alive that has like eyes. Water itself from Ponyo. I just watched that like 2 days ago, and I was like, you know what? That's kind of cool, actually. I'm gonna go with the water from Ponyo. Yeah.
These are both great answers. So ironically, TJ, like my first thought was I forget if the name is Chip, but it's like the little saucer from To Kill. I mean, from Beauty and the Beast. So that was my first thought. But then, Josh, as you talked about water, shoot, like the water horses in the first Lord of the Rings film would be also a very, very good option. So I'm gonna like cheat by saying you're both right. Just change the character in each direction.
I like it. I like it.
Oh yeah,
That's pretty great.
So,
I like the silly start. What would be cool is if you could, while answering the silly question, do the Monty Python, what is it, the Ministry of Silly Walks? And so you actually would do silly walks while answering your silly questions. That's like a meta level of silliness.
Yeah, we actually start sending coconuts to all of our guests, so they have to do the thing while we do it too.
That's right, the whole time through, and then we have to like mock each other in French accents the whole way through.
Yeah,
I think there's like
the whole episode,
new version of the Whole Church podcast for 2025.
Yeah.
Yes,
New year, new
Monty
silliness.
Python aesthetic. That's right.
Yeah. Monty Python unity. So
it's so good to be with you guys. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, yeah. Thanks so much for knowing. I feel like I didn't do an appropriate enough of intro. I was like, he wrote a book. He's a philosophy professor at Furman University, I believe, right?
Yeah, South Carolina, about 45 minutes from North Carolina, just over here in the mountains.
You are really close to both of us. This is what we discovered.
We need to fish and mountain bike then. Yeah, y'all come on.
Yeah.
Do something.
I work in Cherrydale, so.
Yeah.
Cherrydale, South Carolina, like in
Yep.
Green. Are you serious? Yep. So the Chick-fil-A in Cherrydale, South Carolina is under my wife's purview. She's their marketing director. So
nice.
Wow. I had no idea you guys were that close. Wow.
I'm not as close as him. I'm in Lancaster, so I'm like further north. Yeah. One of those directions.
Yeah. But still very easily drivable and no excuse for not jumping off rocks with me on bikes. Let's go do it, man.
Yeah, that's true.
That being said, one thing that we found to engender greater Christian unity is to hear one another's stories. Aaron Simmons, would you mind sharing with us the elevator pitch version of your faith journey?
Faith journey. So a lot of times I get asked, the elevator pitch of my, how'd you become a philosopher of religion? Or how did you land studying Kierkegaard or continental philosophy? So the faith story, I think actually is a very short elevator pitch. I am a fourth generation Pentecostal in the Church of God, Cleveland, Tennessee. My grandfather, Ernie T. Height, was a pastor in the Church of God up in Ohio. My uncle on my dad's side, so both sides of my family, was a fairly famous and influential evangelist and one of the first Pentecostals behind the Iron Curtain over in Russia back in the 80s. And so I was, as we say in my traditions, teethed on the red back hymnal. I started playing drums in church when I was about, 14, 15. Played drums all the way into college. While in college, went to Lee University, a Church of God university. And while there, toured all over the world playing drums for ministry groups, and had really amazing experiences down in Jamaica with like the old Alvin Slaughter stuff. It sounds like a metal band, but Alvin Slaughter was, the whole like Hosanna Integrity kind of music back in the mid 90s. So toured around with him for a while. Did some really amazing stuff I was honored to do, and then realized kind of during college that as much as I loved drums and I was good at it and really enjoyed being in that space, I wasn't sure I wanted the tip jar and cargo van lifestyle after college to kind of set up the next moves. So I decided to instead go to grad school. And the reason I went to grad school was because my dad was a professor and he fished like 100 days a year. And so that seemed like the obviously best job in the world. I didn't understand he already had tenure and these sorts of things. So I went to grad school at Florida State and studied humanities and history and intellectual history, all this sort of stuff. I went there, by the way, just to watch football because I was a Seminoles fan. My master's degree is signed by Bobby Bowden. I met him years later and actually handed him my master's diploma, to which he responded, so cool. Well, dadgum, son, are you sure? And I was like, man, I went there for you. Yes, I'm sure. So apparently I'm according to him, the only actual degree from Florida State that he signed. But went there, and while I was there, I ran into a bunch of challenges to my faith that could be fairly expected. My professors hit me with Foucault and Nietzsche and Derrida and onto theological objections to classical theism and all these sorts of fancy things that weren't part of my daily life when I was at a Christian college, going around the world playing drums and, getting down with altar calls. Walked into these intellectual spaces where those assumptions could no longer be assumed. And I decided to do everything I could to take my faith intellectually seriously. And so I spent about a year reading every objection that I could get my hands on to Christianity, to theism, to religion. And what it did was not cause me to abandon my Christian heritage, but it instead caused me to locate that Christian heritage as informed by and hopefully matured by the tradition of European continental philosophy. So that's what got me into Kierkegaard, Derrida, Levinas, these thinkers who may or may not have been Christians or even religious themselves, but the way they thought about religion resonated with me. And so I've said publicly that Kierkegaard is why I remain a Christian, and I mean that seriously. His version of Christian faith was something that hit me at a time when I was willing to walk away from it. But to be honest, I got sick of the kind of argument apologetics mode and found his existential version of Christian life as a risky thing that we direct ourselves towards with all that we got in us. I was down with that. And so that then led to Vanderbilt, where I went to study Kierkegaard and continental philosophy of religion. And as a result of that move, I spent, probably close to a decade writing hardcore academic stuff and, played in the philosophy of religion space, but was definitely very public about my own identity religiously. And then a friend of mine, you may know his work, Amos Young, a very famous Pentecostal theologian. He basically reached out and he was like, look, man, I need you to come out of the closet as a Pentecostal. We need that voice. There's not too many of us out here in the postmodern philosophy space. And so it was his encouragement that led me to get more public about that. And then that has more deeply informed the work I do. Though, this is the last point I think I'll make on this, is my identity as a Pentecostal Christian is one that I hold now somehow in, I think, a constructive tension with being a very progressive political human. And so my progressivism, my Pentecostalism, and my postmodernism are kind of the three pillars or stool, tripod legs upon which my identity now rests. And so I am opposed to confessional philosophy because I think it's just theology, which is important and we need it. but we also need philosophers who don't argue from those assumptions and are not fully interested in arguing to those conclusions, but that wrestle with really hard ideas and important stuff in ways that allow questions to go all the way down. And that's what I do as a professional, though my identity personally is a progressive postmodern Pentecostal. So my elevator pitch.
No, good stuff though. I was going to ask about your faith community now because all three of us go to theology beer camp. So it's like Trip Fuller Con is what Will calls it. It's his circle.
I expect that very soon there will be people getting Trip Fuller in like Hobbit makeup tattoos on their shoulders. Yeah, and for what it's worth, if anybody will do that, a Trip Fuller, but like with Hobbit feet, I will send you a signed copy of Camping with Kierkegaard. All you've got to do is send me the picture of your arm or shoulder or leg, and that's absolutely yours.
Well, to make it really easy for everybody, I actually designed Trip Fuller as a Hobbit for an avatar for a different podcast. So that artwork exists. Someone just has to get it tattooed.
All right. So you email Joshua, get the artwork, get it tattooed. Free book is in your mailbox.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. But I think at Theology Beer Camp, the three of us are the only people I know of who've ever openly called themselves Pentecostal. The first time I went, I was still calling myself Pentecostal. I didn't leave that church until probably last year, the year before. So now I attend a Lutheran church. And depending when you ask me, I either call myself Lutheran or Christian Taoist is kind of where I'm leaning. TJ's still a part of the Pentecostal church, though. So
okay,
yeah. So
2.5 Pentecostals are the max amount. And
Church of God of Prophecy.
Oh, okay. The COGOPS.
Yep.
Okay. Well,
So
you're close. It's just that you added 2 extra letters, but it's okay.
It's a weird history between the COGs and the COGOPS.
Yeah, there's a split. I'm actually now part of an Assemblies of God church here in Greenville, South Carolina. Love the staff there. The pastor there is a good friend of mine, and it's been. I think I can say this honestly. It's the only Pentecostal church that my wife and I have attended in maybe the last, close to 20 years that has been excited about me being a part of the community.
Mm-hmm. Oh man!
So church. When I identify as a Pentecostal, I should make clear that does not mean that many Pentecostals are excited about me being part of the community. It's instead a heritage and a theology and a history that I take very seriously, both personally, right, as my grandfather and uncle, and the history that they've offered me and the heritage. But it's also the case that Pentecostalism is in its earliest versions and the kind of early decades of the 20th century in America is remarkably progressive in its inclusion of women and African Americans, people of color. Of course, William Seymour famously at Azusa Street, who studied theology by not being allowed into the rooms because they wouldn't let Black folk be part of the theological community. And that's then who God uses to bestow the kind of contemporary Pentecostal movement. It's not to say that I affirm every single doctrine in that history, right. But it is a history, I think, that is worth remaining tied to critique the evangelicalization and fundamentalization of Pentecostalism over the last several decades. And so when I identify as a Pentecostal, it's actively because I no longer identify as an evangelical. Mm-hmm. And that pivot allows me, I think, I may be wrong, but it allows me a little bit more room to groove. Because when I say I'm Pentecostal, a lot of people go, now what's that mean to you? Right? What is that? Whereas if I were to say I'm an evangelical, they all assume all kinds of things about me, which are really false. And so evangelical became disentangled or became so entangled that I could not detach it from the kind of Trumpist, Christian nationalist garbage that I actively oppose. Pentecostalism gives me a history precisely to critique those movements within my own tradition. And so that's what I mean when I stay there.
Yeah. Right. No, the Azusa Street Revival, something just everybody should study that thing. That was crazy. But I mean, I still hold on to a lot of my Pentecostal heritage and stuff. It just, for me, it got too toxic, and I was not tough enough to stick it out and try and make
well,
a
church
difference.
is hard. Like I don't want anybody to hear what I'm saying as, oh, you're a progressive Christian reading a bunch of postmodern philosophy. Check out your local assemblies of God. Bad idea, right? So none of this is a easy path that I'm trying to walk. It's instead an attempt to say there's something about what, again, Amos Young would describe as the pneumatological imagination that I think Pentecostals get right. And I want to be part of that because I think that pneumatology actually invites the very love and justice and inclusion and hospitality that TJ, the opening passage appeals to, right? So for me, church is very hard. And to be honest, post-COVID, I don't go very often. And I don't know if I feel bad about that. Right? I think I might. And yet, when I go, I'm not actually sure that church is offering the thing that I go to church to find. But I still take my son every single Wednesday night because I want him to grow up in the tradition where the idea of God as personal and invested in our embodiment, the way that Pentecostals understand, I want that to be made normal for him. And then I just try my best on the way home to say, yeah. But all the stuff that they also said about gender identity or our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, like, we want to reject that. Right. Yeah. So it's it's the spirit that I want to maintain, but I'm happy getting rid of the way that has turned into a spirit of a conservative age, if I can play on that term.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's where both of us probably are. I mean, I have a lot of listeners who are more conservative, so we can have that debate some other time. But I think we're both on board with you. DJ, you were saying something?
Yeah, no, just growing up Pentecostal and like having that idea of God's relationship with us is like personal and invested has made it really, really funny. I went to North Greenville freshman year.
Oh, wow.
We had like 4-year education class, like freshman seminar type thing.
Yeah.
And we're asking, everyone's talking about their relationship with God. And the guy next to me, he goes, I don't really believe in God as like a religion, like traditional Christianity type thing. It's like more of like a personal relationship thing.
Yeah.
Everyone else in the room was like, what is this guy talking about? I was like, no.
Heresy, burn him.
I kind of know what he means. I kind of get it.
He's a witch.
Yeah, that's kind of what we grew up with. Yeah, ironically, mostly I was in Church of God of Prophecy, like same thing with TJ, which is where I met him, was at a church camp with Church of God of Prophecy.
Nice.
But I did spend, when I lived in Florida, my mom went to Florida State University, so I grew up a Florida State fan.
See, I knew there was virtue in you. It needs to come out like a Florida State shirt would help like just convey this. That's right.
Yeah, I need that. I know. It was so funny reading your book. I'm like, oh, he likes to hike. I like to hike. Oh, he's a Florida State fan. I like this guy. No, I also
this year's been hard. But Florida State fandom
we don't want to talk
has
about
been as hard this year as going to
church?
the Pentecostal churches in a
I don't
time
go
of
to
Trump's reelection.
A game or a church.
So, let me make sure. Like these are both very, very hard
path to
places
walk.
to be right now. That's right.
No, but when we lived in Florida, there wasn't a Church of God of Prophecy, so we attended Assemblies of God, and then when I went to school at UNCW. I actually ended up working at an Assemblies of God, so I actually started some children's churches with Assemblies of God. So I kind of got connection with both of you guys here.
Okay,
I got it. Okay, figure it out a little bit.
So we all met separately. I only met you very briefly, Aaron, at Theology Beer Camp 2023.
Okay,
because it was like in passing. I was trying to get back to the geek stage to set us up.
Oh, nice, nice. And so was that the one in Springfield or North Carolina? Springfield? Okay, very cool. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, I was there for 2 years, skipped this year. And to be honest, I did because Tripp invited me and stuff. And I was like, look, man, I worry about there being kind of too narrow a set of voices that the audience is hearing. And so I'm going to take a year off because they've heard me 2 years in a row, let other people speak. And then if I can get another book out this coming year, I'll come back as part of that. But it's such a cool place.
Yeah, we've determined there's a strict 2 Pentecostal limit at beer camp.
I think that's right.
That's actually why I had to become Lutheran, so that we can all 3 be at once.
So we can all Well, where 2 or 3 are gathered. So as long as TJ and I are there, you're still fine, Joshua. right?
Yeah. So we recovered 2023.
Yeah.
But
I love that.
Before we get into the book or anything, there's a couple of lines of yours that get repeated on our show and by friends of our show that listeners have probably heard us use and haven't gotten to engage with the source yet, which is you. And we were hoping you could help unpack those lines for our audience and maybe provide a little context for the next time they hear us use them.
Yeah.
We have two here. We say living a life worthy of your finitude,
Yeah.
which you want to go ahead and do that, or do you want to hear the other one first?
Let me hear both of them. Maybe I can weave them together.
And then faith is risk in a direction.
Oof. Yeah, I love these passages. And
Yeah, we do too.
It's funny. Well, I appreciate that. It's funny because just the other day, a buddy of mine said some phrase here in town. TJ, you'll know this. We have this rails to trail that's been paved, and so families and everything use it, called the Swamp Rabbit Trail. Yep. And in the book, I refer to the Swamp Rabbit Lance Armstrongs as these, kind of a-holes that we need to avoid and all this. And a buddy of mine the other day said to me, he was like, dude, ran into another Lance Armstrong Swamp Rabbit guy. And I was like, oh, that's funny. A Swamp Rabbit Lance Armstrong. I should use that. He's like, you doofus. It came from your book. So it is important.
That's phenomenal. That's great.
At least the two that you're mentioning, I am aware of having said, which is a bar that actually occurs.
I know, I get it. I have a good close friend who keeps like a book of quotes that he just hears people say and he writes them down. And he was just reading them off the other day. And every few minutes I'd be like, oh, that's hilarious. Who said that? He's like, it was you. You said that.
there you go.
Who knew?
Well, I mean, these two ideas are kind of linchpins of how I make sense of two things. On the one hand, it's how I make sense of existential philosophy as a tradition. And there's nothing in that tradition that necessitates religious existence, understood as determinate, theism or conceptions of the divine named God. Existential philosophy on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's specifically the way that I make sense of my own Christian identity today as someone who takes progressivism, Pentecostalism, and postmodernism as not necessarily like equal threes, right? I would say, my relation to God, I hope, is more important than my relationship to, social conceptions or how we cash out democracy, but they're all informing the others. And these two phrases, what's worthy of your finitude, as a question that confronts us at every instant, couples with faith understood as risk with direction, because if I think about this existentially, this is simply the awareness you ain't gonna live forever, at least not in this mode or this form, right? Back to my son's question, Dad, if we're all gonna die, what's the point of living good? Couldn't I just care about what benefits me? And it turns out that's a really, really, really compelling option, unless we then say, well, what's worthy of my finitude is not something I can answer without appealing to the direction of my lived risk. So what do you take to be worthy of the time you have, since you don't have an infinite amount of it? What are you going to do with the time you have? Then whatever your answer to that question is the direction in which your life, your energy, your belief, your passions are oriented. But the point is, there's no guarantees that you're doing it right. So you might think you're doing it right, and then come to find out, oh my goodness, I thought I was helping people, but in fact, I was just being patronizing. I thought I was contributing in the right way. It turns out that charity was stealing all the money and, oppressing the very people I was trying to benefit. But moreover, you might orient yourself toward a conception of the divine, and it turns out that that's not how the divine works. It might be the case that you orient yourself politically, and it turns out that that political direction leads to authoritarian regimes, right? So wherever we stand, and this is the postmodern part, you are always doing the best you can to do the best you can where you are. And you can't get out of that where you are to guarantee that you're doing the best. And so that move, that riskiness, is what people like Friedrich Nietzsche, Jean-Paul Sartre, these atheist existentialists, give us, as I think, an important reminder about the idea that faith is not religious conviction. Faith is that orientation for who you're trying to become. And this is why Sartre says we should live in good faith rather than bad faith. Being in bad faith for him is appealing to some set of certainties, appealing to some revelation that takes away the riskiness of our decision. So if you get that existential side, right, this risk with direction, what then is the direction that you think allows you to give an answer to what's worthy of your finitude? I might be wrong, but this is the best I've got. That's the best I can do, and I'm going to do it the best I can. Then you can recognize, oh, but one option for a risky direction is the complicated other-oriented love that animates what Christian hope is. And so when I say I identify as a Pentecostal Christian, that's one way of me giving some content to the direction worthy of my lived risk. And so in Camping with Kierkegaard, I try really hard to say, look, religion understood in these determinate ways is an option. It is not what I'm suggesting is the only option. I don't do apologetics that way, right? But instead, I'm trying to open spaces for people to realize, oh, what's deeper than my religious conviction is the reality of the human condition. And our human condition is shared, and it's the only universal we know of, right? We're all going to die on a long enough timeline. And so therefore, notice what that should motivate. In the book, I describe this as humility, hospitality, and gratitude. It motivates living toward the other person because you realize underneath what divides us is the shared vulnerability of relational life. So that's, for me, what's worthy of your finitude is the question I ask all my students. It's the question I ask my son. It's the question I try to live a response to. But the response that I live to that question is the content of my faith. It's the content of the direction worthy of the risk that I cannot have guarantees I'm doing it right, but I'm going to do the best I can to live on purpose where I am. So those are kind of the two poles of this general outlook. Hopefully those who are more conservative religious can hear that as absolutely, that's a risk worth your finitude. Others who might be saying, I don't know about this theism stuff, guys. Perfect. That means you're getting the existential part. You're just choosing differently the direction of your risk.
Yeah, man, there's a lot there. I unfortunately might have to cut out early from this one. But there's a lot from Camping with Kierkegaard that really spoke to me, and I read it at really an opportune time in my life. So, essence of that, I want to bring out and talk about. One thing that's interesting is like how you formatted the book and like almost like story version for each chapter, and then also like kind of weaved in the camping. It's very approachable, I think. So I guess my questions are going to be, instead of just giving you a straight question, I'm going to give you my story with your book and see how you respond to that.
I love that.
Yeah. Ironically, we wanted to do this earlier, and I was going to like speed rush read your book last January, and then that didn't happen. And instead, I slowly read it throughout the summer. And it was really interesting. There was a lot of stuff that challenged me that got brought out in October when there was a shooting at my house that I was like, oh, that I didn't realize that your book was almost a catalyst just waiting for something in my life to happen, I feel like. So, I'm reading this thing about like what's worthy of my finitude and stuff. And some of the stuff that you challenge is like, and this might not be you. This might be that I listened to a bunch of stuff at once and attributed some stuff to you that wasn't all you. I don't know. I listen to a bunch all the time. But, I'm thinking of like what's worthy of my finitude. And I'm like, okay, so that means Jesus, right? And it's like, oh, it doesn't always mean that. Sometimes it actually just means sitting by a campfire and actually trusting that God has the world and he doesn't need you to personally reach to every single person out there with evangelism. And I'm like, oh, okay. That takes more faith than trying to take it all on myself, actually. And, I'm wrestling with some of these ideas. Something that you bring up a lot is like there's these big moments in your life that you were like, somehow that wasn't the thing that clicked that made me realize I need to make time for camping and biking and all this stuff.
Right.
so what was really interesting is like I kept all that. I read all that. I'm like, okay, so that's good. Worthy of my finitude. What's that thing that makes me a better me? What's that thing that's worth me risking my time for? And I actually realized that some of that is going to theology beer camp, hearing philosophy. I think you actually inspired me to kind of approach a philosophy and some of my own education a little bit more. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. But yeah, even Kingdom Hearts became a big thing where I realized actually this is something that makes me feel alive, this game. And instead of saying it's a worthless waste of my time, it makes me a better me because it makes me feel alive. So, dedicating some time to that is something that I started learning to do. And then after theology beer camp, on the way to the airport, there was a shooting at my house. My wife got grazed with a bullet. My dog got hit in the face. And I'm sitting here faced with this whole thing of, if everything had been moved, like if everyone just stood like 1 inch to the left, I lose my wife, I lose my dog, I lose all these things that I really probably haven't been making time for at the time. And I'm still kind of in the process of maybe switching my future career. I'm thinking about getting into law. I'm working 80 plus hours a week. And I'm like, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I want to spend more time with my wife and my dog. Those things that I think are worth my time that I'm alive. And I think what's really funny is the thing that challenged me is how often you said there wasn't a single moment that it clicked for you. And I'm like, well, I kind of don't want to let this moment pass me by. I kind of want to let this moment change me. So that's where I'm sitting with your book and some of your words here. I don't know how to make that a question, so I don't know how you would respond to that.
I love it. I first, very glad that your wife was only grazed, that she was the inch to the right.
Thank you.
There's actually a story Martin Luther King talks about where he gets stabbed, and the report comes out that if he had sneezed, he would have died because it would have basically nicked his aorta and he'd have bled out. And he gets this letter from a little white girl. I think she's like 11 years old or something like this. And she writes a letter and tells him basically, I just want to let you know I'm glad you didn't sneeze. Right. And this idea of we live a life of inches, of millimeters. As a mountain biker, I can tell you, 2 millimeters difference on how you roll your handlebars can prevent a crash depending on how your body moves. Right. Buddy of mine last week, we were riding a new mountain bike park and he went around a turn and millimeters difference. He hit just the right rock that slid, that made his tires slide out. And he went face first into a tree and then down some rocks. Thankfully was okay, in scare quotes, like no ER trip. So he was okay. And I think that what's cool about that understanding that life is a game of inches, it allows us to take seriously the whole point of philosophy is to pay attention. That's it. Philosophy is not about telling you how to live. It's about inviting you to pay attention to you've chosen to live some way. Are you okay with that way? Right. And in the book, I try my best. I think I maybe could have done better. I don't know, but I try my best to make clear nothing in here is ignoring the embodied empirical material conditions by which those choices are made. Right. It is the case that in a society still defined by the horrific legacy of patriarchy, that often women have a different relationship to agency than men do. Right. It is the case in a history of slavery and the reality of continued racism that people of color are not given the same kind of agency as a social reality as white folk often are. And none of that is meant to say anything other than this awareness that those structural things that sometimes make the very choices that we make harder to see and harder to come to terms with are things all of us should be invested in working on, right? Like I am made better when I am concerned about the freedom and agency and intentionality of my neighbors. And so the thing that I love about what you're saying is, hey, I had this instant and I realized I don't want to miss what this instant might reveal. I would say that's just you being a good phenomenologist and taking seriously the givenness of your reality, right? I've been given this moment where my finitude was made real where my joys and what is worthy of risk has been made palpable. And other stuff that I thought I might want at least has to be rethought in relation to how it impacts those things. Exactly. Now, how you choose, this is where I stop short, right? And believe me, when I speak, I've spoken to audiences all over the country on a couple book tours now with this book. And it's so funny. It's always the college students that get like stoked about what I'm saying, right? Because it has a lot of the kind of, hell yeah, throw up the devil's horns and send it, bro. There is some of that in this book. But then they want, all right, cool. So how do I do this? And I'm like, no, you missed it. I can't tell you, yes, Joshua, now go to law school. Or no, don't go to law school. That will suck your soul. I have no idea. Yeah. Both seem like options that are worthy of your finitude if you think the risk is one you're okay having taken, even if it doesn't work out the way you hope. That idea, are you okay with this being the story, even if the end of the story is not the telos that you want to be the case, then I think you've done the best you can. And so that's what I would encourage everybody to take seriously. Don't think there will be a light switch moment, right? Thank God. Hopefully we don't have to, risk losing a spouse for this to occur. For me, it was a bunch of stuff that didn't change things. And then COVID hit and I realized, oh my goodness, how have I not been changed? Like when my son looked up to me at 6 or 7 years old and said, Dad, I don't want to be a philosopher because they don't spend enough time with their kids. How did that not change me? And it was sitting at home in the midst of a global pandemic that I was horrified that I hadn't made shifts. And so I determined to make some. But I was also a full professor, right? Like I could make these shifts in a way that had a little bit less cost. And that's where I want to say, let's care about each other and not shift the burden, the weight, the cost so heavily onto the most vulnerable, the most marginalized, and then make it really easy for certain people in our society to risk everything because, hey, go bankrupt. Your dad will bail you out. Like we've got to find a way where even economic injustice is connected to this maximization of existential awareness. So I don't know if that is helpful because I'm not telling you go to law school, man. I am saying the awareness of that moment pricking you. That's what I want to try to get people to be more attentive to in their own lives. And then do the best you can with what hits you.
Man, yeah. I do have to go. I'm gonna leave you guys with one last thought, and then TJ can take over here. I love everything you're saying. Don't tell my wife that you didn't tell me how to live, because I think she's under the impression that you told me to play more Kingdom Hearts, and I'm gonna leave it that way.
That was the appendix that was there in like special ink. Only if you hold it up to the right light. That's right.
Yeah. The other thing that I just think is interesting, and man, I wish I had more time to just wrestle with this thought with you. I also, in 2016, I was in a car accident where I basically died and came back. Oh my gosh. Like, it changed a lot, but never did I think, oh, I almost died. It was never a moment of finitude the same way that when my wife and dog got shot was. And I think it's because I grew up in a faith tradition that we're taught, never think about yourself, think about others. So I was like, okay, whatever. Rethink some stuff, but it wasn't as life-changing as, oh, I live for others, and here are the others that I'm living for suddenly being at risk. So I don't know. It was a different kind of experience. But I'm glad to use the smarter word now. I can say that I'm a phenomenologist. I just got to figure out how to say the word, and I'll be good.
Aware. Yeah.
That's all. No, thank you so much for your words, though.
Well, actually,
in your
what
book.
you just said, though, I do want to point out what you just claimed. It was the harm to the other, not to me, that was a moment. This is actually Emmanuel Levinas's critique of Martin Heidegger. Martin Heidegger says our own death is the most significant thing about us. Levinas comes along and says, no. It's that the death of the other marks us in ways that then our own death gets taken up only because of the vulnerability of everybody we love. And so I would say what you are saying is, in fact, the right Levinasian understanding, and one that I hope others will pick up on. It's not about egoism. It's not about me. Camping with Kierkegaard is not your finitude because you matter so much. It's unless you take up what's worthy of your finitude, you aren't going to be appropriately invested and responsive to the others. And you'll let them become afterthoughts in an egoism that remains undiagnosed. And that's what I'm trying to do by inviting us into agency.
Man. And if you love that as much as I did, I'm just going to say, I recommend getting the audiobook Camping with Kierkegaard. It's great.
I don't know. They have to hear my voice the whole time.
That's what I say. His voice is just,
it's oh my gosh. So here's the thing. I will also make an offer to all the humans. If you all will like send my sales over 100,000 copies, I will use all the money to go get like Morgan Freeman to do the next one. Okay.
Well, I like hearing it in your voice.
The reason you have to hear my voice is because I sold so few copies by that point that I had to do it myself upstairs in my little studio. So,
well, I'm appreciative of it. But anyway, I trust TJ
man.
to take this conversation where it needs to go from here. Thank you so much for joining us, man. I really
oh my gosh, let's get back together.
Wish I could stay on for more.
We'll do another one soon, man. Absolutely.
Oh yeah, for sure. All right, I'll talk to you later.
All right.
See you, brother.
All right. I've only been doing this for like 6 years, so I don't know if I can do this alone. But with this being,
it's going to be great.
I hope. But with this being our first episode of 2025 and everyone complaining about New Year, New Me, which is just pessimistic. Like, if someone wants to change, who cares that they're just doing it because it's a new year? Let them try to change. But
I think it's kind of like investing. When's the best day to invest? Yesterday, right?
Yesterday.
But when's the second best day? Right now. I think the same's true for New Year's. Hey, do it.
So, but how do you address those ideas of change coming with the new year, or New Year's resolutions being pointless, like kind of like we just talked about? Like it's.
Yeah, no, this is a cool question. So yesterday I did a little YouTube short, which is one of my New Year's resolutions. So I've been doing a YouTube channel called Philosophy for Where We Find Ourselves since the spring of 2020. I launched it when COVID hit because I was looking around trying to find voices to help me navigate like the mess that was. And though there were some amazing voices doing amazing work, there were also an awful lot of philosophy professors out there whining about having to do Zoom and not knowing how to deal with the reality of the world breaking. And I was like, my gosh, like we should be the best at this, right? Like this is what we do. And so I started this YouTube channel. It led then to now my Substack, which is called Philosophy in the Wild. Camping with Kierkegaard was kind of, in unison with this. It's all a shift to public philosophy away from like the 12 books that I did that are unreadable academic tomes that I recommend to no one unless you really like reading Heidegger in German and stuff, right?
Right.
And so one of my resolutions is I'm going to try to do more YouTube shorts because it turns out my 5 to 10 minute videos, I've got like nearly 300 that I've done on the YouTube channel. People watch like an average of 70 seconds. So I'm like, all right, maybe I can make philosophy 60 seconds worth. Maybe they'll watch all of it. And so yesterday I tried to launch my New Year, New Me, new YouTube shorts. And what I did was said 3 philosophical lessons for the new year. And I actually think they, for me, are virtuous versions of resolutions. Resolutions are complicated because what we act like is just, it's like a secular version of name it and claim it theology, right? People who don't know, TJ and I, of course, like immediately can say amen, brother. But name it and claim it's this idea where if you just speak it into existence, it happens. Well, as anybody can tell you, getting a gym membership is speaking into existence absolutely nothing but a monthly bill. The only thing that actually claims a healthier you is making time to go to the gym, right? So these 3 philosophical ideas are as follows. First, Seneca, the ancient Stoic, is right when he says, regrets are a waste of time unless they yield transformation. So let go of the past if all it's doing is making you feel bad about yourself and keeping you stuck in the mire of shame and grief. But if that actually allows you to say, my God, like I didn't change when my son said that to me, shoot, I'm not going to allow there to be a day where I haven't tried my best to live into spending more time with my son. Now, there's some days I can't, and some days I've got to be at the office, and some days I'm on a book tour, or some days I'm riding bikes with friends or whatever. But this is all part now of that becoming a priority, right? So regret, let it be transformative, says Seneca, not what stifles us from transformation.
Right.
Secondly,
I've always lived that way. I just, every time somebody asks, it's like, what are your regrets? I don't have any.
Yeah. Well, and that's Seneca's actual recommendation. Don't regret. But I think when I say don't regret, too many people and some psychotherapist friends of mine say, whoa, like, again, easy for you to say, privileged man, right? And it's like, well, there's all kinds of regret, but only if it is transformative, if it's a way of saying, man, you know what? I could have done that better. How then can I live today, right? And then the second thought is Aristotle, who says habit is what shapes character. It's not enough just to say, I want to be X or Y. I've got to then put in practice enough time to make habitual. And when I make it a habit, it becomes normative, which is a sexy word for it's now normal and I don't have to think so much about doing it. Right. Right? And so Aristotle is basically saying, all right, Seneca, we have some stuff we wish we'd do differently, so it transforms us. How do we then make transformation possible? We make it habitual, so now it's normal and not as hard. And then this leads us to Kierkegaard, who says, you are who you are becoming. Now, he doesn't actually say that. This is my take on Kierkegaard, but you are who you're becoming. In other words, if you don't work today to make the habit that you want to be normal, it will be harder to do tomorrow because you've made habitual not doing it, right? So you are now the self you're becoming. So if you aren't cool with who you are, then make some different habits. And I think that a new year is actually a perfect invitational moment to reflect on, am I okay with my habits? Well, A, what are they? Am I okay with them? 2, are there transformations that I want to put in place and make habitual because of things maybe I wish I had done differently this past year? And then finally, am I okay with becoming the person that the self I am is inviting? Am I okay with that trajectory upon which I am now walking? And this is why I talk a lot about the trails of life as a metaphor. We're walking a trail. Well, that trail is going to get you somewhere. If you don't like that waterfall, get off the trail, go the other way to the overlook. But you can't keep walking that trail and then be, frustrated because it's that dumb waterfall. Mm-hmm. That's what the trail was. And so be okay with who you're becoming. And this is all a different way of just saying, hey, what's worthy of your finitude? Risk yourself in a direction that you're okay with having lived.
Right.
So that's my version.
Falls or Looking Glass Overlook.
Yep. Which one you want? They're both great. And you got to be, they're two different trails. That's right. That's my New Year, New You philosophical version. And this is why I'm actually fine with resolutions. I just want to see resolutions that become transformative habits, right, inviting the self that we hope to become.
Right. And I know a lot of people who don't think turning something into a habit will really do that much. I work in a restaurant. I've worked in a few restaurants, all in the same company. So it's really, really easy to see it happen in real time, actually. Going from a store where it is already a habit to do the right thing at the right time. Everything is always clean. The new people see that. They pick that up too. Trying to change a store to be that is extremely difficult because you're trying to drill that habit into it. But once it's there, it's going to stay because everyone's going to do it. All the new people are going to do it. That's just going to be the way it works. And that's what habits are like for us.
The way I tell people this is that norms norm us. Mm-hmm. And that's a kind of, weird way of saying what we let be normal will then shape what we take for granted as obvious. So one of the things that really bugs me, and I talk about this in the book, is there's a rhetoric right now deployed by like every person about, well, that's just the real world. right? Or you go to college because it trains you for the real world, or welcome to the real world. Like this narrative of the real world as this necessity, this obvious thing that just is the way it is. And so we do everything we can to adjust, adapt, shift, change, because that's the way the world works.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm way more compelled by the existential philosophers, and for what it's worth, the hip hop artists that I listen to a lot, where Bus Driver says, hey, we can make it better. Or Kendrick Lamar says, sit down, be humble, right? The whole idea of the real world as a stifling norm that norms us away from change is something we should oppose. I'm way more interested in inviting people to envision what world they wish were real. And then talking together about, okay, what steps can we take today to make that world real and normal for our grandkids? How do we do that? And the problem is norms norm us by shutting down question marks. And I think, to be honest, one of the most dangerous places for shutting down question marks is the church. And that's where I'm trying to work now with some of the pastors at my church to say, hey, what if we do like a night of hard questions? And you let me talk to the youth group and just answer the best I can, or at least let their questions be real questions and let them like be heard in real ways, rather than answering them all with, this is the way it works, this is how we do it. What if we actually said, you know what, that's a hard question and there's not great answers. Here's 3 options that people have thrown out, and here's why some of them seem more compelling than others. Like, let that be okay. Then we've normed possibility. And the way I sometimes put this is, every pastor should ask themselves, if a child went to my church and grew up in my church all the way through children's church to youth group, are they more or less likely to become the next Martin Luther King because of that experience? And sadly, I think the answer for the vast majority of church communities is far less likely to become somebody who can envision a possible world that requires challenging the norms we've been handed.
Right. Yeah, I feel the same way. It's like a big part of what we do here is when we talk about issues that are common in the church, we don't talk about what we think is the right answer. We talk about all of the most popular answers to any question.
Yeah. And I think this is what's cool about Beer Camp, right? Beer Camp is not a space where, a particular view is the only thing available. There's a lot of process theology going on at Beer Camp, and God bless them. But it's also the case that, some open theists like me show up. And there's some classical theists that show up because they're, interested in expanding their horizons. And there's some atheists, but still who use God talk as part of how they make sense of their world and meaning. And then there's others who aren't sure what kind of theism maybe they still hold on to, but they know that abandoning all of this asks too much of their own heritage, right? That spectral conception is something that I'm not, for what it's worth, suggesting every church should be that way. I think it's actually entirely fine for the Baptist church to be different in real ways than the Assemblies of God church, in real ways than the Lutheran church, because then it allows us to see, wow, there's a whole bunch of ways to make sense of the hardest stuff about human existence and what we take to be divine revelation about navigating it. But where things go wrong is when all these different whats get taken up individually as the only how, right? If you don't do this way and yield this what, then you are absolutely mistaken, wrong, problematic, and, maybe even going to a lake of fire. But what if we instead said, what if I held this what humbly? What if I held this what with hospitality? What if I held this what with determinacy, but yet I recognize there are lots of other whats that reasonable, smart, good people hold? And that, for me, is the risk with direction, right? It's risky to stand here because I'm aware there are other places to stand, and some of them might actually be better than where I stand. That's why I need to be in deep conversation with people who are standing there, right? And that's, I think, something churches sadly don't do a good enough job of. I think they're more interested in, training people in a what and making that what look obvious so that people live in a dichotomy that is deadly. This is God, everything else is not. Instead of saying, man, how the heck did we take ourselves so seriously to think that we got God figured out perfectly? A little more humility, a little more Kendrick Lamar sitting down listening, or as Trip Fuller says, my grandma claimed that you had 2 eyes, 1 mouth, but you also had 2 ears. So watch, listen, speak less. And I think churches probably need to do a little bit more of that, which doesn't mean they get wishy-washy. It doesn't mean that they then just say, whatever goes. I'm not that kind of a relativist. But unless they take seriously, whatever we hold to be true is held by some people because of some influences in a particular social location in light of a particular history, then we're not actually being honest about who we are. And that, I think, is really short-selling the mysterious, tremendous reality that Christianity invites us into.
Right. So we do cheat a little bit in a lot of these episodes. And the last thing we'll ask before outro stuff really is, do you think there's anything that we missed about Kierkegaard, our finitude, or just like Pentecostalism at large that we didn't ask about that you think our audience should know about?
Yeah, that's a good question. So because your podcast in particular is addressing this idea of the whole church, of unity within the church, I will make a plea, a request of all those listening. The thing I hear more than anything else when I speak at explicitly Christian spaces is former Pentecostals will come up to me and say, oh my goodness, I wish I could still be Pentecostal, but they didn't want me because of my progressive social beliefs, because I became inclusive in LGBTQ issues, because whatever. And so my plea, the thing that I hope people would hear, my book came from Kierkegaard. I hope they pick up a copy, but it's not a book trying to argue for an agenda. It doesn't envision a particular way forward for the church or society. It instead invites humility, hospitality, and gratitude as moral virtues that embody or characterize everything that we embody in the world. But wow, I wish there were more people more qualified than me who could find a way to say, what would a robustly Pentecostal, pneumatologically informed, relationally personalist tradition look like as embracing the dignity of all human others and presenting this in a way that actually still has Black gospel music and drums hitting on 2 and 4. Like, if we could somehow find a way for those churches to exist, or at least exist more prominently, I actually think we wouldn't have such a dichotomy between, oh, here are these churches that are in this kind of more low church tradition, and then over there are the churches that are progressive, that are high church or more liturgical. Finding a way to say, wow, what would liturgies look like if liturgy looked more like boom pat and walking basses and spaghetti after church, coupled with inclusivity, affirmation, being a voice in the world that says what it looks like to live out our Pentecostal relational personalist faith is seeing the personhood of every other, especially those that are downtrodden. And it's my attempt to go back to the opening scripture verse, right? Showing the love of Christ in a way that doesn't say, if you want to be progressive, go to a mainline high church. Well, what if you want to be progressive just because you think that's what Christianity invites us to, love other people, and then do that in a space where the Pentecostal, fire in our bones is also part of what that church looks like? Man, like, I can tell you here in Greenville, that church, I've not found it. Right. And for what it's worth, I've been asked to leave a lot of churches because I'm trying to stand in that space. And so what did we miss? I actually would say we as a society are missing Pentecostally infused dynamic churches that are oriented toward the justice called forth by the minor prophets in the Hebrew Bible. That is the thing that I hope thinking well about Kierkegaard, about continental philosophy, about existentialism in ways that then throws us into what faith might look like. For me, that's the thing that I am missing and I wish there were more of. I know that's a cheat answer, like completely violated what you were trying to get at. But that's actually, whenever I speak to Christian audiences, man, I don't let the norms of here's the dichotomy. Let's actually start rupturing that dichotomy and create spaces and communities where that's possible. And I think it takes people listening to people like, you and Joshua to create that. People who are going to homebrewed, but saying, wow, but I still think God's way more personal than some of it. Awesome. Let's find ways to make those spaces more inviting and maybe even more prominent. Right. So that's what I would leave you with. Yeah.
All right. So we do have a couple more things. A lot of people think this is the hardest question on our show. But before we wrap up, we always like to ask our guests if you had to provide one tangible action to engender church unity. What is one practical thing our listeners could go do right now?
So I'm going to stay what my marketing agent keeps telling me, Simmons, you got to be on brand. And I was like, branding is garbage, man. I hate that stuff. But I am going to stay on brand on this one. I think the single most powerful way to facilitate that kind of unity today is for folks to get outdoors with each other. So go camping, go on a hike, mountain biking, that will do it for sure, but that's a little bit higher ask, right? Yeah. But being in the woods together, man, like all the stuff strips away that tends to divide us. And if we're going to have a conversation about places where we disagree, I'd rather have that conversation while reaching a hand to help somebody over a boulder, right? Or linking arms to cross a river. Like, part of the camping with Kierkegaard idea is not suggesting everybody should go camping. My wife thinks sleeping in tents is absolutely dumb, and that's why Airbnbs were invented, right? She's a beach person, not a mountain person. That's fine. Go walk on the beaches. But it is the case for me that there's something powerful about all the mountain metaphors in existential philosophy. And I think the reason they are there is because it speaks to getting away from the set of assumptions that dictate how we normally live and invite ourselves to take risk more seriously as palpably in front of us. Ooh, that rock is sharp. Don't jump on it. There's a snake. Be careful. Like the awareness that that's actually always true. The snake in the grass might be the politician who's actually lying to you and using God talk to do it. The sharp rock might actually be the temptations of a capitalistic society that tell you success is the only way to gain value in life. But when we get outside, as Anne Lamott says, go outside, look up. That would be for me, you really want to transform unity, go spend time in the mountains together and invite people to walk with you. As I say at the end of my Substack posts, again, Philosophy in the Wild, would love to connect people there. I say there all the time, come, let's walk together and talk along the way. And for me, that's what my wife and I said when we got married to each other as part of our wedding vows. And it's what I offer to every reader, to every listener, to every person in every one of my classes. Come walk with me and let's talk along the way. I need to hear your voice so that I can improve my own. So that would be my suggestion. Take more camping trips.
Yeah, I love that. That always works for me. So,
let's do it, man.
Yeah. You ever been to Cumberland Island?
I have not. It sounds like a place you need to take me. Just do it.
Yeah, we should go.
So, I'm down.
before we get into the outro, we do like to ask for everyone's God moment, and that is just a moment where you saw God in recently, whether that be moment of worship, a challenge, a blessing, whatever it may be. I always make Josh go first. I think that's why he left early.
That's right. So it sounds to me like you're going to have to go first now, TJ.
Yeah, so I have to go first. Normally I get to go second. You, of course, get the most time to think.
All right.
But for me, it's pretty easy. If you've been listening to the show for a long time, you know I put a lot of value in friendship because at the end of the day, sometimes it's all you got. And I have been blessed with the opportunity to have a friend visit me from Virginia, like Lynchburg, Virginia, which is, so it is 6-7 hours away.
Yeah.
And he's just been hanging out in my apartment for 5 days.
Wow.
I don't know. It's great. It's so nice to be able to reconnect with people who are not as active in our lives anymore because of circumstances like that where they had to move or had other opportunities. And it's so great to just be able to spend time with friends like this again.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Feels kind of like going back to college.
That's so cool. So I'll give two. One is because it's a moment conditioned by another person. The other is one that happened to me personally. So a couple of my colleagues in the philosophical world, especially in the kind of Christian philosophy, theology world, have recently been diagnosed or at least made public that they've got terminal cancer. And watching them navigate something that is, hard to even, like, there's no way that I would know how I would navigate that. And, knock on wood, Lord willing, like it's not something I will have to navigate. And yet watching the courage of these people facing finitude in a way that is all too heavy, right? All too palpable has been a moment where them being honest about saying, I don't even know how to pray. I don't even have the energy to pray anymore because it feels like that, not only is God not listening, right? But if God is listening, God doesn't care. And watching these Christian brothers and sisters navigate this and be honest about those questions is ironically a moment of me sort of seeing God walking with instead of God, walking in front of and like knocking over all the bush. Right. We may have to blaze a trail. I don't think God prevents us from anxiety, but I think God walks with us to therapy. And so God has shown up to me in a perhaps ironic way by watching my friends navigate the dark night of the soul and trying to do whatever I can to be a support and encouragement in those spaces has been me reflecting on, well, what would God expect of me in those moments where it seems like God's too far away?
Right.
And then more empirically, I guess, I mentioned my buddy going down hard on the mountain bike trail the other day. But then getting back to the truck, getting him fixed up, and, of course, taking pictures of his bloody arms and stuff. Again, this awareness of the riskiness of human existence, right? He was okay. We were okay. But that same day, people died in car wrecks, right? People died of heart attacks. People died for all kinds of reasons. That same day, people were heartbroken. People lost people. Like, the awareness, not to say, oh, I'm so glad I made it through, but the awareness of saying, thanks for this moment and that I've at least got another one. Like that ability to inhabit gratitude. It always makes me think of Anne Lamott when she says that her 3 favorite prayers are help, thanks, and wow. The wow moment is, I think, precipitated by the thanks, this gratitude that I am here despite all of the factors that could have not let me be here, allows the wow to be what jumping that rock, catching that trout, spending the time around the campfire, watching my son with his friends here for New Year's Eve, all around the campfire in the backyard. Like, wow. And the gratitude that conditions that wow is something that is intimately part of how I make sense of a God who loves us enough not to take care of the situations, but to be with us in the midst of them. And for me, that's a God moment that I really, really appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I love those. So, if you enjoyed this episode or if you hated this episode for some reason, we do accept hate mail. You can email that to me personally, email it to the show. But consider sharing it with a friend, share it with an enemy, share it with your
There you go.
cousins. Yeah, bother your cousins about us. And there are paid subscriptions you can choose to support us on. We use Captivate, Apple Podcasts, Patreon. You get extra content. We can support our ministry if that's something you're interested in. You could check out all the other shows in the On His Out Podcast Network on the website in the show notes to find more thoughtful Christian podcasts. Some of them are Christian-ish. If that's
I like the
not
ish.
really your cup of tea, yeah.
I think ish works.
Yeah, if you enjoyed the show, thank you. And next week we're going to have another roundtable. It's been a little while, but this time we're doing Christian mysticism and what the fruit of the Spirit really are. After that, Tom Ord will be back to discuss with us an upcoming book, Amipotence, Support and Criticism, which is a collection of essays in response to his idea of amipotence, which if you're not
Which
familiar,
features an essay from me, for what it's worth.
yeah, I heard.
I am critical of omnipotence, and so yeah, you can see my critique of Tom in there.
Yeah. And then we're going to be interviewing Jonathan Foster. He's the author of Indigo, The Color of Grief. And finally, at the end of season 1, Francis Chan will be on the show. Maybe.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Jonathan, I've got Indigo. It's a fantastic book. Highly recommend it. Also check out his Substack. He and I are going to do some Substack guest posting with each other this year. So a wonderful, wonderful guy doing some really cool stuff. And let me just plug, support, encourage. Yes. If you are listening to the Whole Church podcast, go find a way to be a support of the work they're doing. And I say this as somebody who is now doing public philosophy, and it is tricky and weird and icky feeling like that you're trying to offer this to the world in a way to help the world be like less crappy. And yet then also saying, oh, by the way, pay me for it. And yet it takes a lot of time. I spend roughly 20 to 25 hours a week just doing public philosophy that is disconnected from the job for which I actually get paid. And it's an enormous, enormous investment. I know you guys do the exact same thing. So yes, support Whole Church, become a Patreon supporter of them. And while you're at it, if you're interested in some philosophy about the outdoors and some existential thought with a little bit of philosophy, religion kind of on the edges and some political stuff on the edges, please go join me as well. A bunch of places you can connect, but jaronsimmons.com will get you to all of it. But on Substack, it's Philosophy in the Wild. YouTube, it's Philosophy Where We Find Ourselves. And then also definitely don't miss out on Camping with Kierkegaard, available at Amazon. You can get the Audible if you haven't gotten bored of my voice yet, which I'm sure you all have. So yeah, man, it's been an absolute joy. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope we can do this more often since we just found out we live next to each other.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I think I've actually seen your name show up on my to-go order screen before, so.
Wait, that's hilarious. Oh, my goodness.
Might have to make that happen, yeah. Anytime, of course. It was such a good time having you on, and I know Josh hated missing out.
Yeah, well, we'll just have to come back together, and what would be really fun is to get him to drive up here to Greenville, and let's record a roundtable with the three of us in the same room, which we definitely should make happen. Maybe sit around a campfire with some microphones. We'll do it.
That would be fun, yeah. All right.
I would love it.
We'll see you all next time. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for your time.